Welcome everybody. Today's the day we are installing the coilovers finally. I'm waiting for my brother to come. So he's going to be recording for me while I do the install. It's the middle of May, guys, in Chicago, and this weather sucks. It's about 55 degrees, pretty chilly, but it's time to get this car dropped in the front, a little bit in the back. I am so excited. What's up, guys? My brother's here. He's behind the camera. He's gonna be recording the install of these coilovers that we got behind me. Bring him in, Greg. Check out his YouTube channel, Bully Kid. CKS coilovers with Swift springs that we're going to be installing, along with rear camber arms. Basic tools that you need for this, guys. Absolutely basic, nothing crazy. I just got my regular tool set here with, standard sockets. You don't need any special keys like German cars. Pretty straightforward. Everything is easy to access. I did go ahead and rent from AutoZone these spring compressors just in case. I want to give a big shout out to Lou from Modern Japan for hooking me up with these coils, helping me figure out the correct shock dampening that he has been running. So we're going to start off with 7 from the stiffest in the front, 14 from the stiffest in the rear, and go from there. He says that's a good starting point. Thank you, Lou. If anybody needs parts for your Lexus, hit up Lou, Modern Japan. His link is going to be below, and let's get started. All right, there's one 10mm bolt here and another 10mm bolt here that holds the ABS line, so we're going to undo that.
I'm not sure if you guys can see, but there are vents going into the brakes to cool them off from there. Likewise, one from here. Functional.
Alright guys, this bolt is a 19mm deep socket to get this out. It's pretty hard on there, so you gotta use a breaker bar or something to get it loose. Alright, so once you undo this lower bolt, it simply slides out. There's no tension on it. The shock now on the bottom is free. So what I'm going to do and go ahead is go to the top and undo the top 3 strut mount bolts. 3 14mm bolts on top. These are the ones we're going to undo.
Going to be a little copper pin, and you just have to drop this bolt right here, which is going to lower the whole assembly, and we can get this shock out. Alright, we are using a 17mm socket right here. We got the bolt loose.
So what you need to do is don't unscrew it all the way, just enough so the threads are there, and we're going to have to hit this with a hammer to get this ball joint free.
Yep, she's on there.
She's on tight. There's not a lot of room to swing a hammer here. does not help with anything. There we go.
Got it?
Yeah, we just loosened it up.
Might as well just push it all out. Is that the right?
Oh, these things are. Still recording? Okay, you gotta hold the knuckle.
Alright, once you loosen that, you can
Not too much because the brake.
You can quite simply remove the whole assembly here. As you can see, everything is off. I'm going to put that upper control arm back on, and there you have it. Wheel spacer fell off in the process. That is all good. These are heavy duty H&R. Special proprietary blend aluminum. Alright, and this is what we're looking at.
So, you're not gonna know exactly what height to set this at. So what I'm gonna mimic is I'm gonna more or less extend this to the same size as the stock one, and then it's easier to compress this down than it is to go up. So if it's gonna be too high when we install it, we'll just spin it down and go from there. So let me spin this down. Now keep in mind, these shocks, these springs are not gonna compress as much as the factory ones do because they're a little stiffer. So we might not have to go all the way out, but we'll see how far we could go. I think that will be good enough just to give us a baseline.
And if you guys didn't see his how to preload your coilovers video, we're gonna link it right here on the screen.
So we're gonna put these bad boys in. Just line up the bolt holes.
How are we looking on the bottom?
We're looking good. I just gotta move this wire around. That's how it's gonna be, like this. And we gotta squeeze this bad boy in here somehow.
Break. Why don't you just... Isn't this too high?
Alright, so we have the coilover in place. We do need to put in the lower bolt. So for that, I do have the jack placed under the caliper, so we could just lift it up a little bit to align the hole here. You might have to fiddle with it a little bit to get it in place. There it goes. So we're gonna snug that up, and this side is basically done.
How hard was that side?
That was the easiest coilover install I've ever done.
How long do you think that took us?
This one corner probably took, what, 20 minutes with filming, so without filming would have been like 15 minutes. Super easy.
Are you calling me slow?
I've done coilovers on my GTI where you have to split the knuckle to get this stuff out, the shock out. Worst design ever. This is beautiful.
Yeah, Japanese cars are usually easier with suspension for the most part. So I'm gonna summarize everything up for the audience here. First, you just have to remove. Is that a brake line hose right there? Or
Yeah,
is that
that's the ABS line.
First, there's an ABS line sensor. You have to remove, what, 2 bolts on there. You have to remove the lower shock bolt here. We loosened up the upper control arm bolt in order to remove the factory shock. And then 3 bolts on top have to be removed in order to drop the shock from the car. 3 bolts, 1 bolt. Let's see. Do not open, do not heat. Whoa, whoa. Oh, hell nah. Made in Korea. Is this a Kia? How is Lexus gonna charge $90,000 for the GSF and they're buying parts? Parts are being made in Korea. Unbelievable. Alright guys, I brought out the scale from the house. Taking the factory shock, we're gonna weigh it here in a second. $13 pounds factory front coilover or shock and coil. And we're gonna put let's put on the coilover here. This is the front one, and see the difference in weight. Now keep in mind, the battery just died. Okay, never mind. Keep in mind this is a lot stronger, tougher build, so it might weigh a little more actually, we'll see. Coilover on. 10.2. 10.2. So we're saving about, what is it, 10.2 and 13. So what?
2 pounds.
2.8 pounds. We're saving 2.8 pounds on each corner, pretty much. So we got 2.8. So let's round it to 3. 3, 6. You're saving 6 pounds off the front, roughly. And once we get the rear out, we're gonna weigh those as well. Alright guys, now we are moving alongside to the rear of the vehicle. This is where it gets a little bit more complex. You have the whole drivetrain over here, a lot more adjustability for the alignment. So the first thing you want to do, you're going to remove or loosen the shock bolts here. Right over here. The next thing you want to do, you're going to loosen ABS sensor that was just bolted on right over here, and we loosened up a few clips from the weatherproofing or sound deadening material. One over here, one over here.
After you got those loosened up, I just took out the 3 bolts on the top of the shock mount right here, and now we'll drop the shock.
Dropping the shock is very complex here because there's a lot of ways you can do it. You have to really take off that spring. There's a couple ways we can go about it.
there's that bolt. So right now, this should be free enough to where I could push it up a little bit to compress the shock and be able to work it out. I highly doubt that.
In my opinion, I really think we have to drop this bolt, drop the whole lower control arm assembly, and there's a bolt for the tie rod end as well underneath the bottom. In my opinion, we would best be taking off this bolt, sway bar end link bolt, dropping this whole control arm, spring will pop up, and then we're done. Bullet's Garage wants to actually compress the factory spring tightness so we don't have to remove the lower control arm, but I think that's going to be a lot more work, a lot more pain to get in there, and it's a very small spring. There's not a lot of room to compress it, and spring compressors are huge in general, so you're going to be dealing with a lot more stress than just dropping a couple bolts. GoPro, stop recording.
Are you kidding me? This is the magical part.
Okay, so he is compressing the shock up and trying to remove it. But how's the top gonna look if you're moving it so much?
Well, I just gotta.
Oh, that's just the shock, right?
That's just the shock. I just gotta compress it and just pull it down straight here.
Oh yeah, but
This shock has a lot of force on it.
yeah, but see, you're already moving the shock all the way to the side here. See what I mean? You don't want to twist it too much.
There we go. Easy as that. All I did was twist and drop it in between. Now we just gotta finesse this bad boy out of here, which might be another journey on its own. We might have to, let me see what we could do here.
Compress it.
We gotta compress it a little.
Lift the car up, and you might have more room to drop it from underneath the car.
Yeah, but it won't fit underneath because of the upper mount. I just gotta compress it here, Greg.
We are compressing it against the car's inner body, and
Voila.
we got it off.
All right.
So this is where I'm gonna weigh it again.
Yeah, but you gotta weigh it with the spring.
I'll weigh it separately. Well, I don't know why it doesn't stay, you know what I mean? Like, we got 7 pounds. Yep. So this factory shock in the rear, 7 pounds. Once we get the spring out, we're gonna weigh the spring. We're gonna compare it to the aftermarket suspension. Now, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, on the factory one, you got the shock, and then you got the spring. It's not a coil over spring or shock over spring setup. They're independently working together. The spring is more towards the inside of the car, while the shock is more outside of the car. Obviously, the further away, the more outer the suspension is, the better the car is going to handle. So actually, if you notice the new coilovers, it's a coil and spring, it's coilover spring setup. So the spring is integrated into the coil, and this aftermarket suspension setup is actually going to be in place where the factory shock was. So it is placing the whole assembly, more lateral or further out of the car. Okay, so we tried to put on the spring compressors on the factory spring in order to compress it so we don't have to remove the lower control arm.
But that failed.
That failed. I mean, it's just
Too tight of a squeeze, it won't fit.
too tight of a space. So like I said, we're gonna remove the top. Let me give you guys some light here. We're gonna remove the top sway bar end link, and then once that's removed, we're just gonna drop this bolt here that's connected to the hub assembly. That way the whole lower control arm falls down and the spring falls off. Then we just have to put in the new coilover, put everything back in, and we should be good. The bolt we're looking at over there.
17 millimeter.
17 millimeters for the sway bar end link. Now, it's funny, I noticed that these sway bar end links are actually adjustable from factory, which is pretty interesting. Most of the time, factory suspension components don't have much adjustability in them.
Got it.
Alright, once you take the bolt off here, you're gonna pull it out from the sway bar, and that's one step down, one less thing holding everything in place. So let's get this last bolt off. Good thing you want to do is you're gonna put a jack stand under the control arm. So when you take this bolt off, you can slowly lower the control arm without everything just going crazy. GoPro, stop recording. GoPro, stop recording. You want to take your wheel or jack and just put some pressure on the lower control arm. Then you're going to slowly remove that bolt. Gun it.
This.
Great success, guys. So we just did it. We're taking the spring off now. The only thing I would watch out for, even though we dropped that last bolt over here and dropped the lower control arm, this bolt that's actually on the hub was blocking it from fully going down. So what we had to do, we had to pull the control arm a little bit towards the rear of the car in order to clear that bolt, and then it was able to drop down. Okay, so this is where we are now. I'm gonna weigh the spring. The spring is 7.4. 7 pounds, 7.2 pounds, 14.2 pounds total. Factory rear suspension, 4. I'm sorry. The factory suspension is 14.2 pounds. Now, 9.6, 9.4. According to my calculations, pure genius mathematician, we are saving around 4.6 pounds in each rear corner. So that roughly equates to about 10 pounds of savings in the rear.
Alright, so we got the rears. Let's try to install them and see what's the best way to get them in here. Probably gonna just start with getting them up and mounted loosely on the top strut mounts so it's not falling on us, and then we'll work on the bottom to get it into place. So
it sure looks like a long shock.
I'll have my brother go on the inside and tighten these down a little bit by hand. Let me get it in here first. Let me take these out.
Just don't hit your fender.
Alright, got me in there.
Alright, turn to your right a little bit. To your right. Whoa. Look at that quality. Okay, hold on. The bottom of the shock, push towards the front of the car a little bit. The bottom of your shock. There you go. Okay, hold on. I need bolts. Hold on, let me tighten them up. There's no other spacer that goes in between here, right?
No.
Okay, I got those loose, tightened a little bit.
All right, guys. So we tightened up the bolts on the top strut mount. It was a little bit of finessing to get the two lower bolts in on the control arm, but we got them in.
What's that, a drink?
Yeah, everything is nice and tight. Tight adjustment, I didn't adjust it yet. I'm gonna do the other side, lower the car down, just take it around the block, pull it back in, and then start doing the adjustment on the height, because I know it's gonna be totally off now, but as long as we got this installed, that's a good first step. I'm gonna do the other side, and then I'll bring you guys back in when we go for a drive around the block and then pull it in. All right.
So one thing I wanted to show you guys is because we're not utilizing that factory setup, and we got the spring on the top here, just put a piece of paper behind the coilover, and I just wanted to show you guys. I know the lighting's not optimal, but there is barely any space between the inner body and the spring itself. I mean, I put a piece of paper here just to see if it can fit, and it could fit. I mean, we're talking about like 1 or 2 millimeters of clearance between the spring and the body of the car. So we're gonna be looking out for any abnormal noises, and if we do hear some noises, that might be the cause of it. Hopefully not. Likewise, you guys can see over here, this was not really, this plastic boot was not really made for a spring to be fitting in here, but it does fit. Again, very minimally, it does fit. So hopefully, I mean, you're paying top dollar for coilovers like this. They did their research, they know the specs and the designs, and hopefully everything works properly. So very important to measurements, check measurements, double check, triple check. So we're gonna be lowering the coilover here on this one.
So we're gonna measure from here, this bottom lip to the top of the lip, and get the distance. We're gonna make it equal to the opposite side, which is what, 100?
So the opposite side we already adjusted to 120.75. That's the distance from the bottom of the, what is it, shim?
Bottom of the locking ring to the top. So let me measure what it is now. We have 122.8.
So the driver or the passenger side was 127.5. So we're gonna adjust this side, this driver's side, to the same thing, 120/75.
Well, actually, we might even lower this a little bit more because that side is still too high for my liking.
So I'm gonna run it here. Well, obviously the car's lifted now, so yeah, that's pointless. But we put the passenger side to 120/75, and it still had probably a finger and a half, 2 fingers gap. So in theory, I think we should be dropping it to around 115ish would be the best.
Probably 115. Let's
115
go that. Let's
spacing.
go with that.
All right, we're gonna roughly put this one to 115.
So let me measure it out so we have that number.
So what he's doing is he's putting the bottom ring up. He's measuring it, so we have
116. So a little bit
115.
more.
There you go. He's adjusting it and remeasuring it.
Still 116.
Keep spinning it.
$114.75. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll spin this down till it locks, till this ring goes down by itself to lock in place.
All right, let's do it.
All right, guys, we did a few adjustments. It's still not perfect. We gotta tweak it a little bit, but have a look of how it sits.
All right, guys, it's been about 5 hours since we started this install. We are pretty much finished. We adjusted the coilover height twice. We checked it. We should be fairly good right now. So we are gonna grab some food here at Wendy's. Hopefully the brother sponsors me, you know, some food because of my help. And, you know, I was writing down all the numbers, making sure everything's on point.
What do you want? Go wraps?
Yeah, 2 spicy chicken.
Can we get 4 spicy go wraps, 2 small fries,
He's you, Mike.
and let me get a large Sprite. Anyway, guys, like Greg was saying, we did forego installing the rear camber arms because the height that I like it at, it's basically maybe slightly lower than the stock one, so I don't really need to run any camber adjustments. It's going to be perfectly fine how it is. So I'm going to be selling the camber arms unused. If anybody wants them, message me below, hit me up on Instagram, Bullets Garage, and we could arrange something. But we're going to get some food, go to a forest preserve, give you some shots of how the car looks right now. I'm going to drive it for a week, let the springs settle, get an alignment, and we're going to be good to go from then on. Alright guys, big shout out to my brother Bullet Kid for recording and commentary during the install. As you see behind me, there's the finished product. Super happy how the car turned out. The front, I mean, look at that wheel gap. I didn't slam it or by any means or anything, but I just lowered it so it looks a little bit better. The front, I dropped it a little bit because I want, you know, that reverse rake look a little. So that's how it's gonna stay. Really want to shout out Lou from Modern Japan, because without him and his information about which spring rates to choose and upgrading to Swift springs, I would not be enjoying this ride right now. This car rides much smoother and softer than the stock factory suspension did. The factory suspension is rough and harsh over bumps. This is gliding like you're on a cloud. I am extremely stoked about that. So happy. I will be tinkering with the dampening on the coils, within a few days, but I just want to get a feeling of how it is at 7 clicks from the hardest setting in the front, 14 clicks from the hardest setting in the rear. Drive it around like that, see how it rides, and then go from there and adjust it. But as of now, how it rides, how it looks, I am ecstatic. Finally, I am happy with how the car is. It should have came like this from the factory, guys. Please tell me if you don't think so. Drop like this with the wheels nicely spaced out. Black trim around the windows that doesn't get rid of the chrome and mirrors. Now it looks perfect. So please subscribe below because your subscriptions mean a lot to me. Comment and like. We'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.